I want to start with a story today. I recently went to see a movie at the theaters, and before I walked in, I checked its Rotten Tomatoes score, which was pretty high. After the movie finished, I enjoyed it, I loved it, but it got me thinking, was that my judgment that really liked this movie? Or was it an expectation because I saw the Rotten Tomatoes score before? I have spent thousands of hours helping companies with their data and decisions. Everything you can imagine. Collecting data, storing it, visualizing it, deconstructing the numbers so we can understand what's the best decision to make here. And I started to come to a conclusion. I think data is killing our intuition. Our love of it, our desire to measure everything has really started to damper our ability to make decisions without data, what we will call intuition. Let's dive in a little bit more in today's video. Hi there, my name is Ruben and I'm an expert in decisions and data, and I have helped hundreds of companies make better decisions with their data. We might be looking at the decision process, how teams make decisions, how individuals make decisions, and of course the role of data in that. Now data in particular is the topic of our video today. I have noticed that teams and individuals really feel much comfortable with data. We hear all the time about you really want to make informed decisions, specifically data informed decisions. Don't just make decisions based on your gut or your intuition. That is something from the past. I saw a podcast recently that focused on happiness, but they will only cover ideas that had science behind it. So if there's something out there that might help you with happiness, but there's no evidence of its efficacy, then it will not get covered. Why waste time on things that have no backing? And I understand the value of this. I understand why we do this. Science and numbers and data have given us a way to sort through the complexity. But of course, we know, you know, I know that there's some situations where numbers and science aren't always the best predictor. So let me talk about how we got here. What would the trends and factors that have led us to this place in time where numbers rule everything that we see, and the lack of numbers is suspicious and in some cases completely limited. Without the numbers, we cannot make a decision, which becomes a problem when you don't have numbers. The pandemic has been perhaps a perfect example of this. There was very little data at the beginning of the pandemic, and even towards the end of it, if we consider the end or the last 6 months or so, even the data itself was unusable in some cases, right? We were dealing with never before seen variants. It wasn't quite clear how they would develop. But there's three trends that got us here. Three things that we have seen over the past, let's say, 2,000 years that have really led us to this moment in time where we love numbers. First, we have seen dramatic increases in technology. Everything from mobile phones to computers and all the elements of technology that have really shaped and changed our lives. Second, an over-reliance on reason. And I'll explain this a little bit more what I mean here. And three, the ever-increasing pool of choices. Perhaps the outcome of globalization and how many options we have for really any given situation. When we look at technology, I always think of the classic example where people expect or assume that their phones listen to them. They say something and then they get an ad for it, so the phone is clearly listening. I'm not quite sure if this is happening or not. If it is, it really seems like Big Brother is highly interested in finding the perfect pair of shoes for us. Perhaps not as malicious as we might think, but technology has clearly shaped what we expect, what we see, what kind of information we can access within seconds or minutes, and that has naturally led to this conclusion that if we can access the world's information in seconds, we should do it. And if we cannot do that, if we cannot pull up a website or a fact or something, then that is something that we should be skeptical. We should reject. Why make a decision without data when we have all the data in the world accessible to us at any given moment? This dramatic change in technology has been talked about ad nauseum. Are we meant to use phones? Is it too many distractions? Social media, deep work, all this kind of stuff. I'm not going to go deeply into this, but this is just a general trend. The role of technology has made it easier for us to pull numbers and use them, and naturally it has led to an expectation that data will be available in every single decision. The second is an over-reliance on reason, and this lets me talk about one of my favorite topics, which is Christianity, which is very random. But what we have seen over the past 200 years is a move away from religion, from religious thought or theology, into more a reasoned thought, thinking based on science, on evidence, on the scientific method. And that has been great. We have seen amazing developments over the past 200 years based on this method, from diseases that have been eradicated, the improvement of the early years of children, right, the reduction of child mortality, food production, and countless others. All came from this approach of science. But naturally, any approach that becomes so strict, so dominant, dominant, it's bound to become an ideology. It's bound to eventually run into problems. And we saw that with the pandemic. We saw countless of governments and organizations who were simply saying, we are following the science. We are following reason, logic, and here's our restrictions or guidance. And in some cases, those guidances made no sense. Even to a non-expert, someone who's not an epidemiologist by training, you would say, it seems like you cannot go to the gym, but you can go to this other place that's very similar like the gym. Or you cannot do a group class, but you can go and do this other thing. So there were all these cases where the restrictions didn't quite make sense. And this is not a fault on science per se. It was just simply that we can use reason, we can use science as a crux, as a saying, you know what? This is science, and thus it is indisputable. It's the only approach. And if you're against it, if you don't support it, then you're really against science, you're against reason and so on. So it's an over-reliance on reason. It's an over-reliance on the scientific method, which I would say that scientists themselves will admit that, it's limited. It's not based on true knowledge. It's not based on the idea that we know everything. There is room for doubt and uncertainty, but our perception of it has been that it's omnipotent. It is really as accurate as God used to be 2,000 years ago. And the third reason is really much more simpler. There's increased choices. And if you look at globalization, if you look at any given product, there is now hundreds of choices that you can pick on or choose from at any given time. Think about food. If you open a food delivery app, I guarantee you might have 20, 30, 40, 50 restaurants, within 30 minutes of wherever you are. Hundreds of food choices and menus and plates. The same principle applies to really any kind of product, clothes, electronics, books. So this increasing pool of choices makes it harder to make decisions. We have talked about the paradox of choice in these videos, and you may have seen the video, and it's just something that we have seen actual science and studies behind it. The more choices we have, the more difficult it can be to make a decision, especially when the choices are really quite similar. I am fascinated when I go out with friends, and it's always a bit of a struggle to figure out where to eat, where really any place will probably be pretty good, but there's this debate because there's so many choices, so many good options. How do you actually sort through them? So these three trends have sort of led us to a point where we expect data in many of the situations, right? We don't just think of a restaurant or food that we want. We want to go on Yelp and see the reviews and see what's good and what's not, what's trending, what's hot. We want to look at the reviews on Amazon to make a choice as to what product we should choose. We want to, of course, look towards science to understand what are the right decisions, the factors, what is the evidence that we should be considering here, what should be completely discarded. And we expect to access all this information through our phones and technology at any given moment. Naturally, data is something that should help us make decisions. So what we end up with is crutches. All of a sudden, if we don't have reviews, we cannot buy a product. If we don't seem to see the proper reviews in a restaurant, we might not check it out, even though the food might be pretty good. And if you don't have numbers, as we saw many businesses during the pandemic, you're completely frozen in time. How can you move when you have no numbers, when you have no evidence as to what is going on? So this becomes an issue. The issue is not data itself. That's completely helpful. The issue is when you don't have it, can you still move? Can you still make decisions? Because you have to. Decisions have to be made one way or another. You cannot simply wait for all the numbers to come in. In many cases, that would be too late for a business, who's going into a new market, for an individual, and even for the pandemic. Interesting enough, waiting for all the numbers to fully flesh out was actually a limitation in how you approach restrictions. So we need to find a way to get back into balance. We need to find a way that we can make decisions with data, our default approach, and we can make decisions without it. The old approach that we can say before our current period of time, and trying to move towards that room more. Will Durant has a beautiful quote where he says that our knowledge is a receding mirage in an expanding desert of ignorance. And this is a humbling thought and quote, and it's something to remember that at the end of the day, what we want is to make decisions, to make progress, and in some cases data will get us there, and in other cases it will not. And the way to start to find more balance is really to start making decisions without data, right? When you go see a movie, make the decision based on the trailer, make the decision based on what you read about it online, not so much reviews, but maybe the synopsis or who's in it. Then you go see the movie, and then when the movie finishes, you make your own judgment. Did you like it? Did you not? What did you think of it? And that judgment is independent of what a reviewer like Rotten Tomatoes might be. You might want to check out restaurants without checking reviews. Just simply walking around and saying, you know what, that restaurant looks good. There's people in there. I never been. That food type looks interesting. Let's do it. So you start to flex your muscle, to work out a muscle that doesn't require data. It is really a decision-making muscle that you start to make it without it. Maybe we go back to this podcast about happiness. Maybe there's techniques out there that can help you with happiness that have no evidence, and you want to explore and then see if they work for you. And if they do, then fine. If not, then so be it. But not being so rigid that you will only hear things, you will only understand, you will only accept things that have a very deep pool of evidence and data behind it. Because at some point, that won't be there. That's all I have for today. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe, like the video, share it, all the things you can do in YouTube. In the description below, you'll find a few links. The first will be to my newsletter, The Growth Needle. I share ideas like this in written format. I talk about aha moments, fun things to share. It's really a short newsletter. It goes out every Tuesday. I think you'll enjoy that, and it's completely free. There's also a link to my second book on decisions called Bulletproof Decisions. It really dives deeper into the processes, the ways of how teams make decisions, and of course individuals, and the 3 strategies for sorting through different decision types. So that book is available everywhere you can buy books: Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, Chapters, I think Kindle, it's all there. So check out that link. And finally, in the comment section below, let me know, how do you think about this idea that data is limited or killing your intuition? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Have you seen examples in your life that support either view? Let me know. Love to hear from you. Until next time.